The snow-covered ravine swallowed her scream before anyone in the valley could hear it. Eleanor Whitford, 22, 5 months pregnant, shivering in a torn nightdress, stumbled backward as the man she once trusted stepped toward her with a calmness that felt colder than the wind. His voice was soft, measured, almost prayer-like as he whispered, "You were never meant to know." Those words would echo long after her body was claimed by the frozen dark in the first brittle seconds of this forgotten American tragedy. The truth is simple. A secret older than the town itself, older than the church that ruled it, demanded her silence. And the man chosen to deliver that silence was the same man who had promised to love her. This is the story the people of Brackenridge County tried to bury along with Eleanor. Long before the night Eleanor disappeared, Brackenridge County seemed ordinary enough. Nestled in the foothills of Pennsylvania, it was a place of sawdust floors, coal dust, lungs, and families who scraped by on sermons and superstition. Yet beneath its quiet routines lay a structure of power older than the courthouse and stronger than the sheriff's badge, St. Dunstan's Seminary. It wasn't just a school, it was the county's mind, its memory, and its judge. Children were raised under its shadow, marriages arranged beside its pews, and sins recorded in its ledgers. Eleanor, orphaned at 8 and raised within its stone halls, believed the seminary existed to protect her. She learned too late that it existed to protect itself. Her relationship with Jonathan Hale, the preacher's adopted son, was whispered about long before anyone knew it was real. He had the kind of face that made mothers smile and daughters linger at water pumps. Eleanor saw something else in him, a loneliness that mirrored her own. Their meetings began with shared lantern walks and ended with confessions in the dark. When she first learned she was pregnant, she told him with trembling hope. But his reaction was not joy, it was terror. A terror he tried to hide, but couldn't, because Jonathan's life was tethered to something far more powerful than love. Jonathan had been adopted as an infant by Reverend Matthias Hale, the head of St. Dunstan's Seminary, a man whose sermons could silence entire rooms and whose stare could make grown men feel inspected. Rumors swirled around the Reverend that he arrived suddenly in Brackenridge with no past anyone could verify, that he accepted no salary yet lived comfortably, that he chose which children the seminary took in, and which it quietly turned away. Jonathan grew up in the Reverend's shadow, shaped by an obedience carved into him with gentle hands and terrifying expectations. Eleanor didn't know that the Reverend had plans for Jonathan, plans that could not survive scandal. When Eleanor told him about the pregnancy, Jonathan begged her to stay silent, not for his sake, he claimed, but for hers. "They won't let this happen," he kept repeating, as if they were a force of nature, inevitable and merciless. Eleanor believed he meant his father. She did not imagine the truth: the seminary, its council, and the secret they had been protecting for more than 70 years. While other American towns grew on industry or railroads, Brackenridge grew on something darker, a lineage of chosen children marked for a purpose no mother would ever consent to. Eleanor's first hint of danger came not from Jonathan but from the seminary itself. A letter arrived under her door, unsigned, written in a hurried scrawl. "We see you, stop." She tried to dismiss it as a cruel prank, but 2 days later her room in the women's quarters was searched. Books were moved, drawers left open, and the small locket her late mother had given her was missing. The matron insisted no one had been inside, but Eleanor felt watched, studied, as though the walls themselves were listening. As her fear grew, so did the unease spreading through the town. Strange rituals began occurring at St. Dunstan's, late-night hymns with melodies no one recognized. Doors locked before sunset, and councilmen seen entering the chapel with lanterns long after midnight. Miners returning from night shifts swore they heard chanting rising from the stone well behind the seminary. Children were told to stay inside after dark. The town obeyed without question. Everyone knew there were lines one didn't cross in Brackenridge. The seminary determined where those lines were. Eleanor's breaking point came when she overheard 2 council members arguing outside the chapel. One insisted she had to be removed before the birth, while the other warned that harming her would awaken what they'd spent decades suppressing. Their voices carried a fear so raw it made her blood turn to ice. She ran to Jonathan that night, demanding answers. He broke. Through shaking breaths and tear-filled eyes, he told her the truth. He was not adopted, he was chosen. Chosen as part of a bloodline engineered by the seminary to fulfill a ritual they believed kept the valley safe from an ancient force buried beneath the land. According to the Reverend, every generation required a child of pure devotion, a child shaped, not born, into obedience. Jonathan had been groomed since infancy to become the next keeper of the ritual. But Eleanor's pregnancy threatened everything. A child conceived in love, not submission, broke the lineage. The council feared this child, feared it might disrupt the ritual or expose the truth of how the seminary maintained its power. Eleanor, horrified, realized she was no longer seen as a person. She was a threat, a vessel carrying something they did not control. Jonathan promised to protect her. He planned their escape train tickets hidden beneath chapel floorboards, supplies buried near the edge of the forest. They would leave at dawn, but someone betrayed them. As the church bell struck midnight, lanterns appeared outside Eleanor's window, their glow stretching high along the stone walls. She fled through the back stairwell, Jonathan following. They ran into the woods, cold air slicing their lungs, but the councilmen were already waiting. The Reverend led them, his expression calm, almost sorrowful, as though presiding over a funeral. The Reverend gave Jonathan a choice: end this problem himself, or lose the future he had been raised to inherit. Eleanor screamed at Jonathan not to listen, but the Reverend's voice wove through the trees like a spell. He spoke of duty, lineage, sacrifice. Jonathan trembled, torn between fear and love. Eleanor could see it in his eyes, the part of him that believed he belonged to them, not to her. When he stepped toward her, hands outstretched, she backed away into the snow. Her breath shook as she whispered his name, pleading for the boy she once knew. But Jonathan wasn't the one she needed to fear. A councilman lunged from behind, grabbing her wrists. Eleanor fought, kicking and screaming. The Reverend approached, offering her one last chance to give the child to the seminary willingly. She spat in his face. His expression hardened. With a nod, he ordered Jonathan forward. Jonathan, tears streaming, whispered, "Forgive me." Eleanor broke free of the councilman's grip and ran. Snow blinded her, branches tore at her gown, but she kept running. She didn't realize she was heading toward the ravine. The snow concealed the edge until it was too late. Eleanor pitched forward, catching herself on a jutting root. Jonathan appeared behind her, reaching out not to save her but to stop her escape. "You were never meant to know," he whispered, his voice hollow, broken. She stared at him, disbelief turning to terror. Before she could beg again, he placed his hand on her shoulder. A gentle push. Her fingers clawed at the root. It snapped. The world tilted, and the ravine swallowed her. Section 14. Her body was found 3 days later by a trapper, frozen beneath a thin sheet of ice. The official report claimed she slipped during a midnight walk. The seminary held a brief memorial, closed. No one questioned it. Trauma was something Brackenridge had learned to ignore. Jonathan returned to his duties at St. Dunstan's, quieter, thinner, and more obedient than ever. The Reverend comforted him publicly, but behind closed doors, Jonathan was kept under constant watch. The seminary had won, so they believed, but the valley changed after Eleanor's death. Livestock were found mutilated, their bodies arranged in patterns the sheriff refused to investigate. Children reported hearing a woman crying near the ravine at night. Miners swore the tunnels groaned like a living thing. The seminary tightened its rituals, chanting louder, locking its doors earlier. The Reverend insisted the disturbances were temporary, yet a fear lingered, thick and suffocating, like smoke that refused to dissipate. Jonathan, haunted by what he had done, began sleepwalking to the ravine. He claimed he heard Eleanor's voice calling to him, soft at first, then sharper, more insistent. The council tried to silence him with sedatives and scripture, but he continued waking in the snow, barefoot, mumbling. "She knows, she remembers." Whispers spread among the students. Eleanor had not died in silence. Something had awakened the night she fell, something the ritual was meant to restrain. The final rupture came during the winter solstice ritual. The chapel was packed, candles burning low. The Reverend leading the congregation in an ancient hymn older than any written record. Jonathan stood beside him, pale and trembling. As the hymn reached its final note, the chapel door slammed open. A freezing wind swept through, extinguishing every flame. Jonathan began screaming, clawing at his chest as though something inside him was trying to break free. The floorboards rattled. The stone walls groaned, and then silence when the candles were relit. Jonathan was gone. The Reverend, shaken but determined, ordered the congregation to go home and speak of nothing. But rumors spread. Some claimed Jonathan was taken by Eleanor's spirit. Others said he had become the vessel the seminary had feared all along. A few whispered that the ancient force buried beneath Brackenridge had finally awakened. The Reverend, desperate, locked himself in his study and wrote letters begging for guidance from higher authorities. No one in town,